There are two other forms of parental estrangement that we'll be discussing this month for the month of April. It's internalized toxic masculinity, and the other one is in intimate partners for our adult children. That can be, maybe I should say, um, relationships outside of their family or outside of the parent-child relationship. Um, that can be a intimate partner or a spouse, and it can be a social base or friends, both online and offline. Now, when I start talking about that, I'm already prepared for the pushback because people, believe that this comes into the area where parents are being controlling and wanting to, assert their beliefs and what have you on how their children should be living their lives, who they should be associating with. That's going to be covered in this discussion series this month as well. What we're talking about today, though, is when there's abuse, intimate partner abuse, when there is manipulation and control, okay? And so, again, toxic masculinity, internalized toxic masculinity, its influence on parental estrangement, and the adult children's relationships with either a abusive partner, a controlling or a manipulative partner. And I don't ever advocate for harm caused by parents or anyone for that matter, but because this is a community for moms that are navigating parental estrangement, the focus is more on how moms can cause harm, okay, or in how they can be accountable if they have caused harm, okay. And so the importance to me in having this discussion is that there are a lot of parents that I've talked to both online and offline who are experiencing this form of estrangement or these forms of estrangement. And with internalized toxic masculinity, that influence greatly impacts the LGBTQIA plus communities with their family, between parent-child relationships, okay? And so I want to talk about both of those as a form of parental estrangement this month. Within the abusive relationships that we're going to be discussing for our adult children, some of that comes into play of where there is substance use as also being a factor. Although we'll be covering that more over the summer, I wanted to, kind of cover it a little bit here this month because it's indeed another factor. Parents say, I don't know what happened. My child's personality changed. They became withdrawn. They became reclusive. They stopped taking our phone calls, stopped showing up to family gatherings. Sometimes that's a red flag and an alarm, okay? Especially when there's a new relationship that's happened, then there's a reason to be a little bit concerned about that or to be concerned about that because sometimes adult children have entered into very abusive relationships. Okay. In terms of toxic masculinity, internalized toxic masculinity, these belief systems influence our society as a whole anyway. It can influence parenting in a way that parents aren't always willing to take accountability for, right? And so that it can come down to, well, this is how I was raised. And I don't know why it's such a big deal for my children. They need to be a little stronger. They need to get it together. I see that a lot with us as Gen Xers, because a lot of times we were the latchkey kids. We were the first original latchkey kids where our moms were going into the workplace either because of divorce or because the economy, created the need for a two-income family. So a lot of us were, raised in homes where our parents were working, right? Some of us were raised in single-parent family homes, right, as a result of divorce, because during that time period of us being children, the divorce rates were skyrocketing, okay? And so a lot of the toxic parenting patterns that, you know, happened for us in our lives with our relationships between parent child, you know, with our parents, a lot of those belief systems we carried over into our parenting. And for some of us, you know, that continued on the same patterns that had been repeated for generations that had caused harm, right? Some of us having not been able to address those issues, or not having the tools or the knowledge or the awareness of how to fix those patterns, we parented from our wounds from those patterns, right? And so instead of creating a different type of parenting, we went about creating a parenting that we thought was different, but it was just a different version of what our parenting or toxic family parenting patterns were, right? And so I can give an example of how we can choose, and this can go like 4 different ways, okay? So let's say you have sons, and the way that you parent your sons is different than you parent your daughters, right? The way that you decide what's considered acceptable is based upon what the internalized, right, toxic masculinity would say is approved. So let's say crying for our son is not okay under that system, under that toxic masculinity system. Crying for our sons is not okay. Them playing with dolls is not okay. Them hanging out with a bunch of girls is not okay, because we're going to make them quote unquote soft, right? Let's say that internalized toxic masculinity says that our daughter can't ride a dirt bike. It says that she can't play baseball. She can't play football. She has to dress like a girl. She has to wear pink. She has to maintain purity so that there's a man out there who's going to want to marry her. And so we're putting all of these belief systems, toxic belief systems that may have been imposed on us by our parents. We're bringing those forward into our parenting with our children. And then we're, you know, at a place of loss, or a loss of words or reasoning or reasons as to why our children are estranged from us when they endured a great deal of punishment under us as a result of internalized toxic masculinity. Now, the other 2 ways that could go is being ultra soft on our sons and ultra hard on our daughters. And that can happen a lot, especially for those of us who are moms within the Black community. It can be a very common practice to believe that, oh, well, you know, men have it really hard, and, you know, well, my daughter, you know, she can't depend on a man. She's going to have to be able to depend on herself, and she's going to have to be strong, and she's going to have to be 10 times better and greater, and everything she does is going to have to be at the optimum best, right? And so we can place these unrealistic and toxic belief systems over our children and cause harm. And when you talk to parents about, well, how do you think that you came to this point of estrangement? And they'll say, well, I don't know. It just happened, right? And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's substance use, right? Sometimes it's mental illness. A lot of times those are factors when a child decides to go no contact with the parent, and it's extending for years. And the parent didn't do anything wrong. It's just that the child is hiding. The child is not well, unable to make good, reasonable judgment calls. I can't remember the name of the movie that Jamie Foxx did. It was about a classical, I think he was a classical cellist. Was he? He was a classical musician, and he had had a mental illness. And he became homeless, and he was living on the streets, and none of his family had been able to reach him. And, you know, this guy came upon him, discovered he was this amazing classical musician, and then started looking for his family to try and reconnect them, Okay, so those are the times where parents can experience estrangement from their children with no, reason or no warning or no contact whatsoever. They just fell off the face of the earth, right? And so that can be a factor for parents having, estrangement of that sort, right? As I also mentioned, substance use can also be a factor. LGBTQIA children who had their parents not respect their identity and who they are, the person who they are and who they told them they were, right? Who that child told the parent, this is who I am. And the parent kept insisting, well, I want you to be sure, or I think this is just a trend, or this is just, something that's a phase you're going through, right? That's a form of parental estrangement through influenced by internalized toxic masculinity, homophobia, right? Transphobia, any type of phobia within the LGBTQIA plus community where a child is made to feel like they don't know who they are, right? And that the parents know best, and that we're going to stick to sometimes religious beliefs around surrounding about your sexuality and who you are as a person, right? And so those are ways that estrangement can come about for a parent and child, right? And a lot of times parents don't want to take accountability for that. This is my faith. I'm not straying from it. That's how I was raised. God don't like, Jesus don't like, and that becomes a problem. That's harmful. It causes violence. It causes harm on your children. Your belief systems are not their belief systems. They're totally full, complete adults separate from who you are. They do not have to ascribe or subscribe to your religious beliefs. They do have a right to make their own choices. And so when we talk about accountability within the community here, it's about realizing how you could have been a hoarder of, I don't want to say a hoarder, how you could have insist that your way was the only way for your child, right? And that if they didn't live by that way, well, you're just going to keep hearing it from me. I'm not going to accept that part of you. You don't get to make that choice. You don't. You do not get to tell your adult child that they have to live their life in a way that makes you comfortable. That's controlling. And that's manipulative. And so when we're talking about accountability, that means we have to be vulnerable with ourselves. How has the way that we've parented our child, how has that had an impact on their mental and physical and emotional health, their spiritual health? Have you allowed toxic masculinity, internalized toxic masculinity for those of us who are moms? Have you allowed that to impact how you've parented? I want to use an example here of my own personal example. I have 3 sons and 2 daughters. I am in a blended family. This is my second marriage of 17 years now. When I was a single mom raising my boys on my own, I did lots of hugging, lots of lap holding, lots of cuddling, lots of telling you you're beautiful, lots of telling them they're beautiful and you're so pretty, and oh, I love your eyelashes. And I would rub my children's hands and I would tell them how soft they were and how much I loved them, right? I can remember my ex-husband telling me, you're going to make them soft. They're going to go out into the world and they're going to get the shit kicked out of them because you've been here at the house treating them like punks. And I remember thinking, I was raised with a sister. I didn't have a brother in the house. And the only access I had to what men are or what men do is when my mom remarried my stepfather. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my father passed away when I was 15. And so my relationship with my biological father was not what it should have been. It wasn't very close and very nurturing. So what I knew of him when we did have time with him was very limited on my scope of what men are and who they're supposed to be, right? My grandfather was a very big influence in my life, but due to the divorce that wrecked our family, between my grandmother and my grandfather, and I'll cover that again later, when we're talking about mother and father wounds that vibrate and echo through generations, and how that can have an impact, and why this work that you're doing at this point in your life is very important, okay? But going back to the influence of toxic masculinity in my life and in my parenting. So I remember that he would tell me, oh, you give me the boys. They're going to spend time with me. And they're going to do this. They're going to do that. That's why we were married. And so during the time that, and I was in a very abusive relationship, it was lots of domestic violence in my first marriage. And so after divorcing my then husband, and he made a decision that he wasn't going to see the kids for not for 7 years, but he didn't see them for 7 years, right? And that was because he said, if you divorce me, I won't see the kids. And so I held on for some time, afraid of that, right? Because they needed their father. Well, during the times he would come back into their lives, he would say, you see what you're doing to the kids? You see what you're doing to the boys? You're making them soft. And they're going to do this. They're going to do that. And so they'd spend time with him and they'd come back. And each time they'd come back, they say, well, I don't want you to kiss me on the lips anymore. Well, I don't want you to hug me anymore. And so I got to a place where I started feeling like, oh, well, maybe I am being too soft on them, and they're going to go out in the streets, and what he said is going to happen is going to happen. I was a young mom. Not making excuses, okay? But I'm trying to get you to understand how these influences can impact our parenting, and how it's important for us to be transparent and vulnerable and honest with ourselves in ways that we have caused harm, right? We don't have to have known better. That's not what we're talking about in these situations. It's not about if we knew better. It's about the actual act, okay? And so I got to the point where I started putting them into more sports. My son, who's my middle son, who leaned more towards going into dance and theater and all of those things. I kept pushing him. You got to go and you got to play football and you got to go on track and all of that. And so, and I'll be talking more about that in terms of parenting LGBTQIA children from very young, right? Long before they become adults and become estranged from us, we could have had an impact on their lives in a way that negatively impacted them, right? And so, where was I? LGBTQIA children. Oh, okay. And so my son, who was more into the arts and more into dance, and he liked ballet, I encouraged that. I did. I bought him his first Cabbage Patch doll. I remember the blowback I got from my family because of it. We just had an understanding, he and I, and I want to share this little bit for parents out there who may be experiencing estrangement and may be walking back through their memory bank, trying to figure out, where did I go wrong? Something I learned that I didn't know. I just knew that I needed my son to feel like he had a place of being. So I created an environment in my home that was conducive for him. And I immediately thought, my son is gay. I didn't know how to handle that because I had never been around people in the LGBTQ community. But what I did know is I always wanted my home to be a place where my children felt safe, regardless to who they are and who they were. And so I remember pushing him to say, it's okay if you feel like you like boys. It's okay if you feel like you're different. I want you to know that this is a place for you to be whoever you want to be, right? And what I didn't learn until later, and I'm saying this so that it can help another parent out here, okay? Our children who are in the LGBTQIA community, they don't know who they are, right? And for us pressing that for them, that's a huge responsibility for them. And being a cis hetero parent, it's important that we don't do that. It's important that we allow them to be who they want to be, and they'll come out when they're ready. I spent years trying to force my son out into the open, and he came out to me when he was 16, okay? And so, although I thought I was doing a good thing, I thought I was creating an environment that was conducive for him. That was an environment that probably confused him more. And he told me about it later, that it was harder because he was already trying to figure out who he was. And I made it more difficult by telling him who he was. And so when I talk about internalized toxic masculinity, and when I talk about its influence on us in our parenting, that can have an adverse effect on our children. And sometimes children will tell us when they get grown and they're older, they'll say, "This is what hurt me," right? Sometimes they don't know. They just know that something feels off, and they can get exposure to healthier family dynamics, and they'll see that, like going away to college, meeting a mate who has a healthy family system, right? A healthy family dynamic where people talk about their problems, people work through their problems. Parents are kind and nurturing and gentle and very supportive and there for them. And that our children can go into those environments and see that and come to an understanding that, wait a minute, something is bad about my family and my upbringing. That wasn't normal, right? And so instead of them being able to come to you and say that, and this happens a lot this can happen. I won't say this happens a lot. I can only say that I want to talk from my personal experience in this one. This can happen when your child has a great deal of respect for you and all that you sacrifice for them. And it can make it difficult for them to come to you and say, "I think that you broke me," right? Because they're looking at, well, I know that my mom and dad had to work very hard to take care of me. I remember that they didn't eat so that I could eat. I remember that they bought me clothes and they didn't have any. Those are factors that our children have within themselves. And so they can alienate themselves or estrange themselves from us because they don't have the courage to hurt us, but they don't want to be hurt anymore. Okay? And so that's why when parents say, "Well, I have no idea what I did. I didn't do anything wrong. And I gave them everything that I wanted and that I didn't get as a parent, and they still won't talk to me, and I don't know why, and I can't reach them." If we as parents are able to walk back through our memory bank, our engagements with our children, sometimes we can start picking up on cues of things that were happening that may be the reason why they're no longer talking to us, right? And that's in the instance of where there has been harm caused by the parent. I'm not talking about in the instances where they've been taken on, not taken on, but they are battling and under a crushing weight of substance usage, okay? Or where they're in a position where they're in a very, violent and controlling a relationship that's very toxic and violent with a controlling spouse or mate. Okay, I'm not talking about those instances. And so when I try and have these discussions with moms, right, I try to be very compassionate. I really do. I want you to feel that this is not about judgment. This is not about me, calling you out. This is me calling you in to yourself. Introspect is what's going to get you to a place in a space where you're able to see the things that are within you that need to be addressed. Okay? Whether or not you reconcile with your child, you deserve to heal from the things that have caused you harm in your past. Things that you may not have healed from that influence your parenting. And a mother and father wound, people believe that the only way that it can influence the parenting of that next generation is that they want to do better than their parents, right? But that's not the case. It can also carry over into the negative things that happen to you as a child, then you'll parent from those wounds. So if you suffered under the weight of sexual abuse, then you may not trust people with your children. You may teach your children not to trust anyone, that everyone's out to hurt them, right? They may miss out on social engagements because you're afraid that someone may harm them or abuse them, right? And so that, in your mind, is protecting them, right? And so you feel like, I'm changing the toxic generational patterns where my parents didn't protect me. I'm going to protect my children. That will not happen on my watch, right? But because you didn't heal from that and it was never addressed, the way you do it is overkill. And so you rob your children of a social life. You rob your children of very valuable relationships with other adults, right? And that's necessary. They don't need only our opinion, right? They need a village. They need to be able to trust other adults. And so when we, and I'm speaking of back in when we were parenting our children when they were young, right? If that was the case for you, then what happens is your children picked up on your adaptations, right? And so the personality of the person who you had to become as a result of your abuse, that's the personality you're going to parent from. Because you didn't heal, now you teach your children to be afraid of the things that you're afraid of. And that robs them because they weren't the ones abused. They weren't the ones harmed. So they'll adopt the way they think about people, the way they develop their relationships, the way they navigate this world will be from a lens of a person who was sexually abused, having never been sexually abused. I hope that lands for someone. So I try to keep my discussions and videos to 30 minutes because I want you to be able to get something from that in a short period of time. And in case you're watching during a lunch break or, we all have a lot to do. It's a lot that we have to try and fit into our days, right? I'm glad you're here. And if you're a mom who's looking to find out why, if you're a mom who's looking to heal, who's ready to be accountable and do the work, I hope that you find community here. I hope that you're encouraged here and that you're inspired to do the work. It's a beautiful thing to reconcile with your children. It truly is. And to do so in a healing space, right? But you can't do that if you haven't did the work on yourself. Because there's a level of vulnerability that you have to be able to give to a person when you're asking for forgiveness. There's a level of accountability that you need to be able to give that you can't respect that if you don't believe that you were wrong and that you caused that harm. If that makes sense. Because if you don't believe that, you're going to re-injure. And that's not fair. It's not fair to your adult child to come to you vulnerable, hear your apology, and open to you emotionally, And then for you, because you haven't did the work on yourself, to re-injure. That's painful. And it is not a good testimony to who you're trying to become. So I'm hoping that something here today sparked something within you so that you'll start the work on yourself internally, nurturing the love for yourself, healing from the pain that caused you to have the wounds that you parented through. And if nothing else, remember that you deserve to wake up welcoming this life that you have and that you've built with open arms, anticipating what next great thing you're going to experience. So much of our life is stolen from us because of what we had to grow and heal from with no help. What we had to learn to live with, okay? I see you. Thank you for being here. Again, my name is LaShawn Wilburn. I support moms who are navigating parental estrangement by encouraging your accountability, your healing, your self-care. You need lots of it during this journey, and a commitment to lifelong learning, because that's the only way you're going to continue to evolve. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.